Sometimes when you do a really nice job mowing your lawn, it feels like nobody appreciates it. And the same goes for being a young person in today's world. Sometimes it feels as though you're doing so much hard work to get ahead, but it feels like nobody's noticing, and it can make you feel flat and wonder what the point of all the hard work is. On this episode of Everyday Greatness, though, we'll speak to some wise adults who appreciate the hard work young people do and believe that it will pay off somewhere down the road. We'll speak to Matt Cronin, the founder and owner of the Pat Cronin Foundation, an organisation set up in honour of his son Pat, who was killed by a coward punch, and the foundation is trying to put an end to those. We'll also speak to Victorian teachers Annette and Tony Regan. But today, we'll be speaking to FRASER Corfield, CEO and Artistic Director of the Australian Theatre for Young People. For over 20 years, FRASER has worked with Australia's leading performing arts companies, venues and festivals, and his work has been presented in every state and territory in Australia, as well as in the UK, Canada, South Africa, the USA and Japan. FRASER is kind of a big deal when it comes to the arts world in general, but when it comes to youth theatre, he is the guru. His work has challenged perceptions of youth theatre in Australia, receiving the nation's highest awards for excellence and placing work with and for young people on the national stage. FRASER believes that good art isn't all about the money, but just trying your hardest is enough to be proud of yourself. Even if your lawn doesn't look that good at the end of the day. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome FRASER Corfield to Everyday Greatness. FRASER, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Being pretty much at the pinnacle of the theatre world for over 20 years, you pretty much could have chosen any job you wanted. Why have you decided to put your focus into youth theatre?
Yeah, look, truth is, Bunny, unfortunately you can't choose whatever job you want in theatre, even if you've been in it for 20 years. But what was interesting to me, so when I was young, I was really lucky. In my 20s, I got a break working for a professional theatre company. And I was really driven to make professional theatre largely because, you know, that's where all the acclaim is and that's where all the recognition is. But 4 years in, the position that I had with LeBoit Theatre in Brisbane coming to an end, and I just wanted to run a company, so I went and ran a youth theatre company in regional South Australia for a few years. And what was interesting about it for me was the quality of the shows you made obviously was really different because you're not working with professionals, you're working with country kids. But sometimes when you're working with professionals all the time, you're desperate to get into the industry and you're desperate to get your break. And the first couple of shows are really exciting, but after that, you don't have much control over what you do. And sometimes you're working on shows you don't care about, and sometimes you're in gigs which you're doing it just for the money, not really because you love it. And I realised when I was working with young people in youth theatre, even if the show was, you know, the show could be great, the show couldn't be great, but those kids, if you got it right, remembered that for the rest of their lives. And you could see the impact of the participation on them and the way that they changed in the way that they related to each other and the way they felt about themselves. And that kind of got me hooked.
Beautiful. So over the years, there's been significant defunding and ultimately the closure of a number of youth theatres around Australia. What's the state of the youth theatre scene in Australia today?
Yeah, look, this is a really interesting one. It's tough. It's really tough. And it's across a couple of different levels. But basically, the easiest way to sum it up is when I started in youth theatre in 2001 through to 2007, there were about 21 federally funded youth theatre companies across the country. Last year there were 4. So we've just seen the money move. Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for it. Basically, our arts funding has been atrophied. It's just been stable and actually decreased proportionally over the last few years. And so all the companies are competing harder and harder, and within that environment it gets you're assessed by panels of peers, and most of those peers don't work with young people. So the money tends to flow into organisations that work with adults. So we've seen the youth sector get tougher and tougher and tougher over this period of time, which is, you know, it's tricky. What's interesting though is that we also know that the theatre offers a range of social benefits. Outside of that, we know it improves mental health and resilience and a sense of community. And like there's research out of the UK that shows that people that are participating in the arts are more likely to vote, they're more likely to volunteer. So it's this thing now where we're having to have conversations with government outside of the arts to say, look, the arts is great, arts for its sake is important, but if you want to help mental health and resilience, you need to put some money into the arts. If you want to look at more interesting, effective ways of working with young people in the justice system, put some money into the arts. So we may find other avenues to be able to get some support for what we do.
That sounds like a really unnerving situation. So how do you try and convince governments or the people that fund your projects that the small, fluffy, intangible stuff that youth theatre offers is worth funding?
Yeah, it's about trying to kind of put some research around what that fluffy stuff is and what it delivers, I think, has been a lot of the conversation. So there's been a lot of stuff about going, like some people will come along and watch a youth arts workshop and go, oh, you just play games for half an hour. And you're like, well, we did, because those games are teaching people how to listen to each other, how to pay attention to each other, how to work together, how to problem solve, how to share. And so while they're games, what they're learning through the games is social skills and the ability to connect. And I think what we're seeing is because so many kids and people in general are spending so much time on devices, they're spending a lot of time in their own little worlds, and they're losing confidence in the capacity to just talk and connect with others. And so it's what we're trying to do is go, we all know that, we're all worried about, we all know the stories now of people who are struggling to cope with everything that's going on. So these kinds of activities help that. The fluffy stuff is really important for our society, and that's the conversation we're trying to have.
That's a very important conversation. If you can find a tangible, measurable way of explaining fluffy stuff, you'll be a rich man.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I don't think we're there yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah. So tell us about some of the most exciting projects in youth theatre today. If we have a spare, whatever it costs for a ticket, what should we go and see at the moment?
Well, there's a bunch of stuff there's some really wildly different things. So often everyone assumes that youth theatre is like going and seeing a school play, and look, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. We did a musical with this extraordinarily talented young woman last year, Hannah Riley, called The Deb. And it was about debutante balls in country towns. It was just like, and it just blew the roof off. And then Rebel Wilson's turning it into a film. So
far out.
Yeah. So it's going to be released. Well, I don't know. They're filming in a couple of months, but I suspect be released next year. Go and see that. That's an example of youth theatre. Like, that was commissioned and developed by ATYP. We got another one which was also a musical. Developed by this young woman, Eve Blake, called Fangirls, which looked at kind of fandom and fan fiction. And that thing toured Australia for, 3 years and has now opened on the West End. It's huge.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So cool.
It's this idea of going, there's two kind of ends to youth arts. One of them is get involved, participate, whatever you get to, you'll learn something about yourself and your people with when you do it. And then there's the other end of it where we're like, okay, well, let's develop a story that we want to tell, and then we're going to find some really talented young people to tell that story so that everyone understands your experience. So we're doing work like that. We're doing work at the moment with the peak body for youth service organisations in New South Wales called Youth Action. So obviously there's a lot of kids in and out of the justice system, and the problem is they tend to be seen as young criminals, and we have trouble seeing the people behind the actions. Yeah. So they got us in, and we're working with young people who've been in and out of the justice system through New South Wales, and we're taking a whole bunch of stories with this really great Aboriginal playwright from Brisbane, Hannah Belansky. And she's crafted these stories, and then we've got these really talented young actors, 4 of them in their early 20s, and they're communicating those stories so that the kids can recognise themselves in the characters. They can also see their actions presented back to them, which at times is a learning experience for them to see their words in someone else's mouths. But it helps broaden an understanding of what's going on in their lives, what the complex, because, there's so many complex things around youth justice and why kids are behaving the way they are. And then working with the service organisations to have a whole bunch of resources around that, so we can take that performance back into detention centres, we can do it in communities, and we can do it in theatres and get people in and go, let's have have a look at this and then have a conversation about what's going on.
Very cool. Before we move on, just tell us where we can get tickets to the Deb performance and where it's playing.
Well, I've got to say the Deb it'll be in cinemas. So that one is like keep a lookout. If you want if you happen to be in Darwin for the Darwin Festival next week, next week, we're taking a show up there called Cusp, which deals with 3 teenagers all on the edge of adult decision making. It's a cracking show. It's got three really talented young performers in it, and that's running at the Darwin Festival next week.
All right, I'm going to go and book a ticket to Darwin. Now, the future of Australian youth theatre sounds really exciting, and one person who loves excitement is Scott Gibbons.
Actually,
so I'm going to throw you over to him.
I'm just stoked with your enthusiasm. For someone who's been doing it for so long, it's as if you got the job today.
Yeah, it stays pretty fresh. I have to say, I'm getting treated more and more like an old person, and that's starting to wear me down a little bit.
Pepper beard, maybe.
Yeah, but I love you can't not love what we do because every time it's fresh. Every story you tell and every experience you had, even if you did something similar 10 years ago, you take it back now, the kids have a different lens, they're looking at it differently, so you're constantly learning.
So what's the spectrum of youth theatre? Is it acting? Is it singing? Is it dancing? Is it writing? Is it producing? Is it directing?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's all those things. I think the thing that differentiates what we would term youth theatre and youth arts to the industry is it's not really about being a star. Obviously that kind of sits under everyone's ego and they quite like it to happen. But it's a recognition that actually the participation is key and what you learn from participating is crucial. So the majority of youth arts is about doing programs that help young people develop the skills to be able to have the confidence to tell either their story or a shared story, make something up and get it on. So it's kind of that kind of grounding. But then you can apply those processes across. So you can do it over a longer period of time, get a transition of young people through working with professionals, and you can create something that sits really proudly in professional theatre. You know, we've co-produced stuff with Sydney Theatre Company, with Belvoir, with Griffin, with most of Australia's major companies. So it's a spectrum of stuff, but generally as long as you're growing, learning and building as part of participating in it, that tends to fall within youth theatre.
And does the elite of the adult world, do they ever share their talents back down to your youth theatre? Do they come along and do a visit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really fortunate. So Nicole Kidman was one of the first kind of big names that came through ATYP, and Tony Collette, and now Rebel Wilson's heavily involved with us. She's fabulous. So we had a Rebel Wilson Comedy Commission, and also Rose Byrne. So Rebel and Rose have been ambassadors for the company, and they set up scholarships.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's really great, and they both do amazing stuff. Like we had one day where we had we just invited, it was just closed shop, so it was just kids that regularly participate in workshops were invited in, and then we had a little forum with Rose and Rebel talking about their careers.
Did the kids know that they were coming in?
Yeah, they knew Rose was coming in and Rebel was in town, so we teed it up with Rose obviously, but and Rebel came in as a surprise, and then the two of them sat down, and because their careers are like chalk and cheese, you know. Yeah. Rose is such an actor's actor. She, you know, finishes one gig and was saying she's nervous about whether she'll get another one. And Rebel's a kind of, you know, she's a really smart star. She figures out where her opportunities are and she works them, and so they have very different approaches to what they do, but they're equally successful.
Yeah, wow. So what age is youth?
Well, for us, it's 4 to 26. It's been a hot topic of conversation from the whole time I've been in youth theatre. So there's kind of some orgs that push it out to 30 now, depending on what they do. But generally, the feeling is if you kind of 4 to 25, you fall within a youth theatre company.
So 4 to 26, they're not in the same class? So you've got segments for age to...
Yeah, we tend to go, so realistically, you go kind of early childhood or 4 to 8, and then 8 to 13, getting into that kind of tweeners age where decision making is still pretty much driven by parents, and then you head into that 13 to 18 teenage years, and then the young adults. And obviously there's blending through that, but generally you're grouped in that kind of category. So most of the big productions we do are aged, kind of the casts are generally 15 to 26.
Right. Very good. Very good. So how do you control ego?
Yeah, it's interesting. Generally, we don't have... It controls itself by the pairing of professional artists with young people. So usually they're working with a team who are big enough and professional enough to not make the young people feel like they're the most... they have the most authority in the room. There's someone else that has authority in the room, and that person is choosing to share that authority with them. So they're empowered, but they're not the boss.
But there's 2 people competing for the same role, or 3 or 4 or 5 competing for the same role. How do you...
We don't really... to be honest, we don't deal with it. We don't cop it as often as you would think.
Really?
And we don't get as many stage mums or stage parents in what we do as you get outside of it, because I think generally if people are really... There's a whole industry set up in kind of training institutions for kids that want to be stars, and they advertise that you come and do our course and we're going to take you to the States and you're going to do... And we don't do any of that. As far as we're concerned, we'll tell you what roles are available. We'll tell you what roles we're offering you. You don't get a say in it. If you want to be in it, great. If you don't. It's up to you. It's not... And almost everyone we deal with understands that.
And the writing, is the kids doing the writing? Or the youth, if you will?
There's different types. So for an entry-level workshop, the kids will create their own script and put it on. But when we get into the stuff like the Deb, where we want to perform to thousands of people, we bring in professional writers and they work with young people. And so they'll workshop something with young people, and then we'll do a reading, and then the kids will give them feedback on what's working and what's not, and the writer goes away and tweaks it. So it's a collaboration. The centre of what we do is this partnership between young people and professional artists. So the professional artists model professional practice and also bring the kind of rigour that's required to make sure something gets really good.
So
and in
good.
the process, the kids kind of keep the as a bit of a tangent, but we were approached by Black Dog recently to... They've got a whole bunch of research on suicide prevention that they're trying to get into schools, and they needed a hand figuring out how to creatively do that. And then we were saying we could do that, and she was saying, well, what do you bring to it? And it's like, well, we make sure you don't make a milkshake commercial. We make sure that the young people are feeding in and going, that's lame, don't do it. That metaphor doesn't work, don't do it. We'll make sure that we can intervene before you've gone too far down the track to create something that actually isn't going to fly.
And did they understand and take you on board?
Yeah, everyone got that as a reference point. They did.
So the Australian accent, is that alive and well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And our focus, obviously, as a National Youth Theatre Company is very much Australian work. So one of the things that's unusual too about us is that in order for us to create work, young people have to be essential to it. So there's this old school of thought in drama that you can't create professional work until you're trained. And that's just not 100% true. Like, talent is talent. You get kids who can sing or play an instrument unbelievably well at early ages because they've got musical talent. You've got people who can draw exceptionally well at early ages because they've got talent. And you got kids who can act really well at early ages because they've got talent. So if we can find the talent, we can tell stories in an extraordinary way. And if you get a kid who is the age of the character they're playing on stage, there is a vulnerability to that cannot be replicated by someone that's 12, 15 years older. So we need to build work so that young people are essential to that work, and there's not a lot of plays doing that because most theatre's commissioned by adult companies. So we create a lot of new work, and we do a lot of work in the dialects and the languages that we're speaking in Australia. So it's a lot of Australian accents, it's a lot of diverse accents. That's kind of key to who we are.
And taking the number of youth outlets from 21 to 4, there was something happening in Queensland where, was it the Newman government that just
Oh, they accidentally defunded the entire youth sector in 1 year. And it wasn't deliberate. This is the other thing that we need to realise, because sometimes in the arts we're like, oh, everyone's picking on us. And sometimes they are, but generally it's incompetence. It's just that they're looking elsewhere.
They were in the acting class of How to Be a Politician and Failed.
Yeah, they thought they were doing really good things by throwing a spotlight somewhere else and completely dropped the ball on all the companies that were supporting young people.
And what happened?
Oh, well, most of those companies have never recovered. A bunch of them closed.
Oh,
yeah.
They didn't retract. They didn't step back.
No. There's been no. This is the thing. The Australia Council stopped investment. There used to be a youth program fund which supported 12 of the small but really essential local youth theatres around the country. That got scrapped in 2016. They have not brought it back, and we keep telling them you have to bring it back because, you know, it's vital for the sector.
But they keep on saying the arts and acting and studios and Queensland in particular, where so many movies are made, we need to have, and then they defund. They don't connect up the dots in the industry. So the film industry is seen as an industry because a truckload of money goes through it. So when a film is made, you know, millions of dollars are flowing through the economy. But what they're not looking at is the industry as a pipeline, and they're not looking at the arts long term because everyone's looking within a 3-year, you know, election cycle. So no one has kind of had the courage to go, we're going to start some work seeding outcomes with young people now that will bear fruit in 10 or 15 years' time, because they don't anticipate being in government then, so they don't get the benefit of it. Wow. So when you take the kids overseas, and you mentioned that you've been to South Africa and America and the UK and various, how do you control, and how many kids are you taking away at one time?
Well, they've all been professional shows so far, so they've all been pretty small crews. You know, they're kind of 3 or 4. We've been invited to a great project in Europe next year, which is bringing together 10 different companies from around Europe, and ATYP has been invited over to facilitate the process, and we'll take 5 teenagers to that. So, yeah, that sort of stuff happens, but we're not... It's interesting because we're not a training institution like NIDA, which is the famous one, or, you know, where it's a pipeline. You're expected to, you go in as a talented artist, you come out with a job. Whereas a lot of what we do, as I say, is about using the arts to find your own voice and find a sense of community. Now, in that process, we churn out a lot of artists, but it's not our main focus. We don't measure our success of our workshop program each year because of the range in ages that we've got and because of the range of outcomes. Like you know, what's really funny is you don't have to go to NIDA. We've got a whole bunch of kids who are 12, 14, 15, 16 that are getting picked up and getting TV gigs and ads and whatever else, which is fine. Those kids will still be unemployed when they're 25.
That was not a laugh. I did not laugh then.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, this is the thing about the industry. It's pretty fickle and brutal, but at the same time, there are great opportunities within it.
Yeah. Fraser Corfield, you are just an amazing man. Your passion and your enthusiasm, energy and commitment, just fabulous. Thank you. I think Barnaby's got something to say.
I do, Fraser. Thank you. Thank you, Scotty. How does it feel when you see a kid that you've helped give confidence to? How does it make you feel when you see them perform a leading role and a packed house gets on their feet and cheers them?
Yeah, it's like, look, there's 2 different levels to this. So one of the things was Thomas Weatherall. Tommy Weatherall just won a Silver Logie 2 nights ago for his work in Heartbreak High. Yeah. I worked with him a year or 2 ago on this show called Follow Me Home, which was, we put about kind of demystifying youth homelessness. He is an extraordinary young man. Like, when you talk about being born with talent, that kid is born with a bucket load of talent, and you could see him being a star. So there is a joy in seeing, and he's a good human being, so there's a joy in seeing someone like that get recognition. Yeah. But there's another kind of joy where years ago I was in a regional youth theatre in South Australia, and there was a girl, and she used to drive the kids that participated around. She was the same age, but she was 17, had a licence. And she had weight issues, she was obese, very shy, wouldn't ever get up. And then slowly over the course of a year, she started to participate in games, and then she started to do bits and pieces. And then 18 months in, we did a show, and we said, do you want to be in it, Emily? And she said, yeah, okay. And she took one of the lead roles, and she was hilarious. And then she got up on stage in front of the whole of Loxton High School, like 1,200 kids, and performed and had them cheering and clapping her. Now, she's never going to have a career, but that changed her life. And just from participating in it and watching watching it sort of changed mine. It's that those rewards are, you kind of they both sit on the same spectrum, whether you're Thomas Weatherall and launching an extraordinary career, or whether you're Emily and just achieving something you didn't think you could do.
That is a very cool answer. Fraser Corfield, we might leave it with that one, but thank you so much for shining a spotlight on the youth theatre scene in Australia. It's been really nice having a chat to you. Thank you also to the ARA Group for being our major sponsor for the 6th year in a row. And thank you all for listening. We hope we've helped make you proud again of just being an everyday Joe or Joanne bag of donuts. Listen to Everyday Greatness next week, where we'll continue today's conversation with Matt Cronin, founder and chair of the Pat Cronin Foundation, named in honour of his son, who was killed after being king-hit after going to pull a mate out of a brawl. We'll talk to him about how he tries to help young people make wise decisions for their own sake and to keep the communities around them safe. We hope you can join us for that one, but if you want to find out more about this show, go to the Everyday Greatness page at barnabyhowarth.com.au or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube or LinkedIn. Thank you again for listening today, and thank you, Fraser.
Thanks,
Fraser, you're a star. Thanks, mate.
Thanks.